The world of drums, it's very deep. There's two ways to record drums and edit drums, and I want to talk about these two ways. So the classic way is record all the drums at the same time and edit all the drums in a group, which preserves the phase relationship between each microphone. This is kind of the traditional way of what you think of when you're talking about a drummer going into the studio and recording the drums. You put up all the mics, you set everything up, you hook it up to the computer, the drummer performs the song, and then you record all the different microphones. That's the classic way. The advanced way is recording all the drums separately. And this is pretty difficult for some drummers because they know and perform the song in a set way. And so when you start to break that down into a bunch of different things, it becomes difficult. So not everyone can do it the advanced way. But if you do it the advanced way, there's some pros and cons. Let's talk about the pros and cons of the classic way first. So one of the best things about doing it the classic way is pretty obvious. The feel of the performance is going to come from the drummer. Now, there's all kinds of different styles of music, and they all call for different styles of production. But for the kind of production that I do, I feel like sometimes it makes more sense for me to have more control over the drums than it does to let the drummer control that. So it just really depends on how technical I think the music is. Now, if I'm going to record Foo Fighters, I probably don't want to mess with editing at all. I would rather just record the drummer. So one of the best ways of the classic way is you get to maintain the feel of the drummer as a performer and as a unique performance. It takes less time to record and edit, and it's also easier for the drummer to play. Some of the cons is that the producer doesn't have full control over the performance. There's only a certain number of edits that you can actually do before you can't move something this far or before you can't separate something. And the editing requires the drum mics to be edited as one unit, which is basically the same thing as sometimes you can get away with sliding the kick a little bit off from the phase of the rest of the microphones and stuff because it's a little bit more forgiving, but you're still limited. Some of the pros and cons of the advanced way. The producer has complete control over editing each individual part. That's just because, when you record each drum in its own group, it has no bleed into the other microphones, so you can just move it wherever you want. The phase issues and the comb filtering is less of a concern because it is separate and you can move it separately. And the producer can create his own feel, so you can actually go in and swing beats a little bit and move things more freely. The cons are you have to record every single part separately, and it's difficult for the drummer to do. And the producer has to have the technical and creative ability to hear what they're building. So we're going to talk about the steps to get started with the classic editing. You're going to put all of your takes into a folder, and you're going to then clean up the takes. And the reason why you want to do that is because you don't want to be cleaning up the takes while you're doing the editing, because then you're focusing more on cleaning it up than you are editing it. You also want to make sure that all the takes are the same length, because if you don't, you'll run into a bunch of problems, and I'll show you why here in a minute. And then finally, you want to group all the takes. And and also move the first hit to the first downbeat. But let's zoom in here and show you what I mean. So this is the classic editing way that I'm going to show you, because the advanced way I think is a little bit more obscure and probably not as useful to most people because it's actually such a pain to do. With the classic way, you basically have two scenarios that you're dealing with. You've got early hits and you've got late hits. So there's two different things you have to do based on those two things. So if the hit is early, you need to cut before the hit and move it later. And you can see that demonstrated right there on the slide. And then if the hit is late, then you actually need to cut before the position where you want the hit to land and move it earlier in time. So this is the result of an early hit edit. If you look, we started here, and we made the cut, and then we moved it later in time to put it closer to the grid marker. And then if we look at the late hit, you can see the arrows pointing to that line. That's where we're going to make the cut, which is still in front of the grid marker, but away from the hit. So that gives us some space to move the hit backwards. And then that's the result right there. So how do we know where to cut? And how do we know what to trust when we're looking at our tracks? Well, first you have to know how sound travel works. Sound takes time to travel, so it travels through the air and goes all around the room. So it starts with the source and then it goes away from the source. It travels. So let's look at this picture here, and you can see the snare drum. I have it circled there with the red circle. When you hit that snare drum, the sound of the snare is going to go away from the drum. And if you look at our room, we have a bunch of different mics set up. So in the red circles on this slide, you can see where all the different microphones are throughout the room. Now, when you hit that snare drum, the sound's going to come out and travel through the air and go to all the different microphones, but it's going to land on each microphone at different times. So the microphone closest to the snare drum, circled in red, has an orange line coming from the snare to the mic. That shows you that that line is so short that the sound coming from the snare is going to go through that microphone first. And then the yellow line you can see is a mic that's much further away from the snare drum. It's going to take longer for that sound to reach that microphone. So that's actually going to appear to be late in the tracks. So let's look at Cubase here. I have a drum session open. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. So this is I'll just play this performance just so you know what we're working with here. Pretty basic beat. Sounds like it's in time. It doesn't sound like it's fast or slow or anything like that. The drummer that played this is a very good drummer. But I want to show you with the click and see if you can hear anything that's wrong. Okay, so what you might hear is it sounds like it's pretty dead on, but for me, it's just enough off that I need to correct it. And that's just because a lot of my productions are very precision based. Now if I zoom in here, I'm going to show you the grid versus what he played. So if you pay attention to this top area, it's going to show you the different beats. And as we go along in the performance, we can see that his hits are lining up very close to those beats because he's a really good drummer. He's on time. But I also want to convey, like, if you can see that as he hits the kick drum, it takes time to travel to all the various microphones. And as we go from direct to room, you can see how it actually travels. It takes time to travel to each one. Now as we go along here, you're going to see a little bit, so like this kick hit in particular is a little bit early. Same there. I'm just going to keep looking. So this is really early. Here's the grid line where it should be, and here's how early the hit is.